we are in uncharted waters, and who better to help steer us than former U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuade and NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss. So, Barb, we don't know what the exact charges are going to be, but one thing this indictment does indicate is no one's above the law. But it could take a long time to play out, right?
Yes, I think both of those things are true. Some of the things we're hearing from Trump supporters is that this is un-American, that it's outrageous. Well, they haven't even seen the charges yet. What they really seem to be saying is that a president is above the law and that it's outrageous to charge him with anything you can even imagine. And so I think they ought to withhold their judgment, at least until we see what that is. As to your question about it's likely to take a long time to play out, I think the answer to that is yes. As we've seen from Donald Trump time and time again, the best defense is a good offense. I'm sure he will file every motion you have ever heard of, and some we haven't, to try to knock this case out legally. He will delay and drag it out. But eventually, I think we'll see this case come to trial, and he's entitled to the presumption of innocence and due process, and the jury will have to decide whether the case can be proved by guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's the way our system works.
And, Michael, it's far too soon, of course, to assess just how history is going to view this moment. But how does it already change our tendency to put presidents and former presidents on a pedestal?
I sure hope so. I just think that presidents have been in this exalted state that the founders never imagined. You know, the founders were pretty tough people who had a pretty grim view of human nature, and they always assumed that someone could be elected to the presidency or another office who would not be someone of good character. They did the best they could to provide constraints. They hoped that every president would be of some of the character qualities of George Washington, but they knew that that was not going to last forever. And the biggest case of this was Richard Nixon in 1974. Once he was out of office, the special prosecutor, Leon Jaworski, was very intent on indicting him for some of the same things that sent people like Haldeman and Ehrlichman to prison ultimately. And Gerald Ford said, no, the American people could not tolerate the idea of a president going on trial. That never should have happened, because what that does is it encourages lawlessness in presidents. And so now the problem is that now that, to my mind, that needless restriction against indicting former presidents is gone, you've got Trump supporters saying, you know, let's go out in the streets. Some of them are threatening violence. Some are threatening intimidation of the judge or jurors or other people in the legal process. That, you know, DeSantis used the word un-American yesterday. That would be the most un-American thing of all.
And, Barb, there have been complaints that that any prosecutor would charge a president, a former president, is being political, is being a bully. How do you get around that kind of political smear, against an elected DA who says he's following the law and the facts?
Well, ultimately, the real test is not in the court of public opinion. It's not in the media. It's not in any political rally hall. It is in a court of law, where a jury will go through a very rigorous process and make a decision whether this case can be proved. In law school, we like to take hypotheticals to try to demonstrate the fallacy of logic. And so if they say it is outrageous or un-American to charge a president and must be politically biased if there is a charge against a president, then does that mean he can commit any crime with impunity? Can he literally shoot someone on Fifth Avenue without facing criminal charges? And the answer to that, of course, is no. And so we need to see this case for what it is. We need to see this indictment being sealed, and it's the jury who will make that decision as to whether it is valid.
Michael, going back to the Nixon pardon, we've both talked to Gerald Ford about this, but you did a formal interview with him, for a historical perspective. Talk to us about why he believed till the end of his life that he did the right thing.
Well, he felt, and as you know, you've heard him on this subject as well. He carried in his wallet the card which referred to the case of United States versus Burdick, 1915, which says that when you accept a pardon, you accept guilt. He felt that that essentially was enough to show people that Nixon had done the wrong thing. And I was slightly rude with him, although I admired him very much. This was in his house in Colorado, in Beaver Creek. And I said, well, you know, what about those who would say, why didn't you at least let the process go ahead so that there could be a mugshot and Nixon could be fingerprinted and he would have a harder time in the future arguing, as Nixon did for the next 20 years, I didn't do much that other presidents had not done. I was railroaded. I was treated unfairly. And Ford, you know, and I respect his point of view, felt that the American people just would not tolerate the idea of a president in the dock. I think given what we've seen, especially with Donald Trump, that has to bow to constraints against a lawless president. We now are confronted with a President Donald Trump who seems to have done possibly lawless things before he became president, which is what we're talking about now. While he was president, instituted an encouraging insurrection that almost took down our democracy. After he was president, in terms of what he did with classified documents and other things as well. You know, the only way that you can stop people from doing such things is for there to be a penalty. And if there's no penalty, this is going to happen again, and our democracy might be taken down by some future president.
Well, this is going to become, to both of you, this is going to become such a part of history for forevermore. Barb, you know, legal history as well as what we all study in school.
Absolutely. This will be a case we read about in the history books. But, you know, let's remember we're watching it unfold, and there's a lot left before the story is finished. We are going to learn about what happened in Georgia with the Fani Willis investigation. We may get charges federally for both the January 6th involvement and for the documents. And so before this chapter of history is written, I think there's a lot more to come.
Barbara McQuade, Michael Beschloss, thanks both of you for your perspective.